First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here today and joining us as we start a conversation that hopefully bridges the gap. We'll get into more about what that means later. I just want to thank Achilles Morales for helping organize this event and making this all happen. We're hoping that today will be the first day in a series of conversations that helps us begin to better understand each other, understand our differences, so we can begin to work for a common good. One of the things that has started this is we live in a time where we're very divided. We're very divided on several issues and several ways and several things that are all happening around us that everybody has to pick a side. And once you're on that side, that's your side, and those are the only people that you listen to and talk to. And we feel that if we begin to have a conversation where we understand that somebody's different than we are, we can work for a common good. Currently in our current system, no matter who wins, 50% of the population loses. And so we want to find a way to let everybody win. Let the right and the left, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, whatever you want to call us, work together to find out what can we be doing to benefit the most possible people at the same time. So today, the point of our conversation today is to define our positions. We have two guests with us today representing different sides of the aisle. We have Justin Friske. We'll introduce him more later. He'll be our liberal representative, and Phil Van Truin will be our conservative representative. One of the problems that we face today is that we only hear the definition of the other side by our side. So say you're a Republican, you tend to watch Fox News and read Breitbart News, and therefore the only thing you know about liberals are what they say about liberals. And vice versa, liberals tend to listen to Huffington Post and watch MSNBC, and the only thing they know about conservatives is what they see on their own respective media. And so if we can let a conservative define for a liberal what a conservative is, then maybe we can have more harmony within each other. So as we go through a few rules that we want to talk about today. Today we're talking about abstract ideology. We're not talking about specific issues, specific candidates, or specific elected officials. We're just trying to talk about these ideologies in the abstract to better define them. The objective is not for us to demonstrate that one side is right and the other side is wrong. The objective is to hear a position that's different than yours so you can better understand that position. So many times in our world we have arguments, and the objective of the argument is to prove the other person that you're right, change their mind. And I can tell you that you're not going to change my mind. And my objective is not to change your mind. My objective is to better understand your position so I can better respect who you are and find out how we can work together to find a common good between us. And so hopefully that's what we're able to do here today, is just begin a conversation where we're talking about our differences. We're not trying to change anybody's mind. And so keep it abstract. Don't assert that you are correct, and understand that we're just here to have a conversation to understand somebody, not convince them that we're right or wrong. So with all that being said, we have, like I mentioned, Justin Friske and Phil Van Truin. Justin is a government teacher at the Lorain County JVS, military vet. Phil is a city council member from Amherst, as well as a small business owner and a military vet as well. So I just wanted to thank them for taking time out of their day to be here and be a part of this conversation. And we'll do rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first.
Sounds
No, I'm just kidding.
We can just, you
I'm
ready?
just kidding.
Wait, are we going on three or after three?
Thumb wrestle. How's that?
There you go. There you go. So whoever,
Feats of strength.
yeah.
I would have won the thumb wrestle.
I think I'm right.
Why don't you go first? Why don't
There you go. So
I'd be happy to go first.
You go first.
So, okay, a liberal. What do I think it means to be a liberal? I think the government can be an arm for change. I think that the government has a responsibility to do so. I think the government, in order for us to be better as a society, the government is a clear and active player in that happening. For that to happen, the government needs to be able to hear its citizens, to hear all voices, not restrict access, allow dissent when possible. I think capitalism is good, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all, because capitalism doesn't care about ideals or about the government or about what's right or wrong, because the base definition, I think, of capitalism is the betterment of myself. So capitalism cut with socialism, for sure, I think is a very good idea in this country. I think taxes are good. I think they clearly help pay for the biggest military in the world, and it's necessary to do so. How we spend our money is obviously up for debate, but I don't think that there's a question that you have to spend on these things. For instance, the road outside, who's going to pay for it? The government's there to be able to take care of these things. Now, even within the Liberal Party, there's an argument about how much you actually spend on this, how much you spend on environmental protection, how much you spend on fining businesses or allowing them to do what they choose to do, how you tax different members of society, how you help different members of society. I think the government is there to do that. Education, clearly, I think the government should be taken care of. Level of involvement is obviously up for debate, but I do firmly believe that the government should have a large role in educating its citizens. Beyond that, as far as, again, abstract, I suppose, you know, I don't think you're going to think any different that, as we briefly discussed before we began, that there's no way my view consistently is 100% right. There's no way. And so for us, as two separate sides of the same coin, sometimes we're going to have to come to some sort of agreement on some of these issues. But that's why the yin and the yang exists. I can't be right all the time because I'm not, as a liberal. For whatever reason that may be. I don't know. That definition might, or that explanation might be beyond me, but I suppose that would be a beginning example.
So, my first question, because you talk about taxes, and taxes are good. And so you feel that the government has a moral obligation to take care of its citizens. And so therefore,
Yes.
therefore social programs, from your view, would be the moral objective of you know, we want to tax people to be morally correct, to help other people who don't have as much.
I'm a little unclear on what you mean by tax people to be morally correct. We have the
Yeah.
ability to tax people to be able to help one another be in a similar position. Again, taxes pay for education.
Correct.
Rather than just wealthy people being able to pay for a good education and poor people not being able to pay for an education, if you provide public education, then that means at the very least, your base in your country, left or right, they're at least consistently educated.
Okay, and so you would think that so you would say, as a moral human being, it is a moral obligation to use taxes to better somebody's life, whether through its education,
Okay,
through a
yes.
social program, or whatever.
Right.
And so my question would be then, is it moral for me as a tax-paying citizen to have my pay that I earn involuntarily taken from me to pay for somebody else? Is that moral?
Well, my my question, which is my answer, is if you don't like it, then what other country do you think you would go to and be better served in that sort of society that won't be taking
Yeah.
the money from you, that the money's taken from you, so you can be in a position where your roads are paid for, where you have a police department and a fire department. They take care of society around you. You're not just having money taken from you. The government's not just saying, ha ha. You're getting services rendered for that money that's taken. Now again, that just begins a discussion of what is good use of said services or not, or finances or whatever. But at the very least, the idea, even in the beginning, that you're darn right your money's taken. I mean, how do you want protection, right? I mean, you want to be able to live in a society that you can go freely from A to B, besides not thinking about foreign countries.
Well,
We
yeah,
have
so-
to pay for these things.
Well, nobody's going to say that we shouldn't have police forces and fire departments and roads and militaries.
Well, I just think sometimes some
Yeah.
people say that there are other ways that you can pay for that.
Yeah, so I think we would all agree that those are good uses of taxes. Now, once again, I'm just asking questions. I'm not saying that this is what I believe, but
I get it.
A while back, I read a book called The Shantung Compound. The book was about a American concentration camp in China during World War II, where the Japanese had invaded, and they kind of arrested all the Americans and basically all the foreigners. There wasn't just Americans, and they put them inside this concentration camp. And the American Red Cross sent in care packages. And they said that these care packages can only be distributed to the Americans, right? And the leaders, because the community had set up a leadership structure and was forming some sort of society, and everybody had tasks to maintain the community that they were in. And the leadership says, we need to take all of these boxes, put them all together, and then distribute the goods evenly amongst all the people. And one of the Americans said, no, that's my box. And they said, well, you have a moral responsibility to the rest of us. And he said, how is it moral for you to force me to do something that I don't want to do? Right? If I want to share the goods that I have been given or the goods that I have earned, it is my right to do so. But to force me to do so, how is that moral? So I'm not suggesting that we eliminate taxes for roads and fire departments and police and education. But some would argue that overly taxing a population to help another population that in some words should just work harder or get an education or get a job. Why am I supporting your freeloading? How is that a moral position to take? If that makes sense.
Once again, if you don't like how that's done, I just think it's that simple. If you don't like how it's done, then lobby your council members, lobby your state representatives, and lobby your federal representatives to then tax differently, to then change the way things are taxed, or whatever. Follow the democratic process to do so. But when you're here, you're taking part of the system, and by taking part in the system. So that's your moral obligation. You've been taking from the system since you were a child. So I suppose if you wanted to go far enough along that line, you could say, well then yeah, you owe the government because you didn't pay for a while. Then, that's a slippery slope argument eventually, I suppose, because then you could say, well, my parents did this and blah, 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 and eventually, well, let's just get down to brass tacks. You live in this society. You may not have a choice as a child to do so, but once you become aware of how things operate, and this is why we pay taxes, and if you don't think that you should pay taxes, then I suppose go somewhere else. I think it's a relatively simple argument. There's a need for these things. And again, if you don't agree with it, then there are people that you can talk to change how things are done. And in a democratic society, if you get enough people to agree with you, then there you go. Then enough people agree, and then I'll acquiesce because, that's how it works here.
And the position that I'm representing isn't necessarily saying abolish taxes. They're saying
Right.
that we're being taxed too much.
No, I
where
get it.
Some liberals would suggest that we need to be taxed at a higher rate. We need to be
Correct.
taking more because,
Right.
we need to socialize, almost every aspect of life.
Right.
And then once again, I'm not saying we're getting rid of capitalism altogether,
No,
but
right,
we should
right.
be being taxed more, and there's someone says, no, I'm being taxed enough. I have, an education for my children. I have a road to drive on. I have a police force that protects me and a fire department to put out my fires. But at the same time, how much of my money that I earn should I get to keep and use as I see fit, as opposed to how you see fit?
That's a subjective stamp. I
Yeah.
don't know how to, we can't, there's no abstract answer for that. That's
Okay,
that's
that's fair.
incredibly subjective, yeah. Because yeah, for me, I don't know, it's fine. Like I generally, with my taxes, like I'll even, and this is, this is a fault in my personality, but like when it comes to tax season, for instance, I pay extra, per paycheck to go into it because I know that I'm not concerned with trying to figure out exactly how much should be taken to, because my father has a friend who wants to get to the point every year for his taxes where he owes nothing. And they've taken enough, he's figured out a way to do his taxes where at the end of the year everything comes out in the wash and it's like, yeah, I'm okay with that, just go ahead and take it, it's fine. That's, as a liberal, I suppose you could say how I generally feel about how the taxes are used. That, I think there's unquestionable waste for sure. But those in arms of government are where representatives look at those situations and say, we need to stop doing that. You can use the money better. Now going to, what is it, Rance Priebus, who came up with the idea of we will not be taxed anymore kind of a thing. I think that's a little too far. Who knows, like ever, the idea that we're never going to be taxed more than we are right now. How do we know where we're going to be? How do we know what's going to be happening? I generally agree with your sentiment, and I think that's why it's an interesting argument to start from. But the thing is, I think once it's applied logically, eventually there's not going to come a point where you would agree that, okay, yeah, it would be logical that we could be taxed more, but you say, no, I'm not going to, because you're saying forever, I'm never going to. Well, but why so definitive? So, it's a conversation as far as taxes, again, consistently. Well, what is it that we're specifically talking about? Is that waste or not? And then if I disagree that it's not waste, then we can have a discussion as far as, well, this is why it's necessary in our society to do so, because then it helps other people, which if we help other people to a degree, but if we help other people, then we help society as a whole. We get helped. A rising tide lifts all ships.
So, first thing to point out that I think is kind of interesting and funny is you said that we're going to keep things abstract, but yet you talked about a specific issue of taxes. So I guess it's kind of my fault. But anyway, it's still kind of funny. But
it is a
abstract, talk about
it's a
taxes.
broad
Yeah,
concept.
Yeah. So if you had to list the three most important kind of issues, once again, try to be as abstract as possible for you as a liberal, what would they be? As far as, what it is you think that when somebody thinks liberal, they should think of these three things, if you could come up with it.
I don't know. Equality, progression, and democratic,
Okay.
I guess.
So, progression, that's one that stands out to me. What does that mean?
Abstract? Well,
Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to be progressive?
Historically looking at the United States, I like the idea that manifest destiny should be viewed as, really? The idea that we look at a section of humanity as less than, a couple of times, clearly, in this country with Native Americans and African Americans, that it takes a long time for us, we passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and then we still have to wait, what is it? 60 years-ish before we allow women the right to vote with the, 21st, if I remember correctly? So, no, 19th Amendment, because 1921, I believe. So why is it taking so long? And that, unfortunately, is viewed as progression, where for me it's viewed as, why haven't we done this? Why has that not been in place? Why has it been necessary for government to legislate that, listen, states, I get that you have states' rights. The thing is, you're under the umbrella of the United States at this point, and that means that it must be equal opportunity for these people, and that you have to legislate equal opportunity is, unfortunately, I suppose, what I mean by progression. So historically seeing that, and then further, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and then you still have to wait till the Civil Rights Act 100 years later to continue to reinforce what you tried to do with legislation after the Civil War. That's unfortunately what I mean by progression.
Okay,
Why
so-
do we have to continue to do so? But and that, to me, again, reinforces my position as a liberal that, yeah, the government needs to be involved in society. It does. To what degree,
Yeah.
but it clearly has to, because I think that's good.
Okay. So do you ever foresee a scenario where we've progressed as far as we can go?
Society is always changing, and our government is built to change. So we're always going to, it's organic. There's never a finish.
Okay.
There's never a finish. No, we're always, I mean, well, shoot, like we were talking about before, I mean, just the idea of liberal, conservative, Democrat, and Republican, those definitions have changed.
Mhm. Well, I
So-
mean, you can look back and, Abraham Lincoln,
Was a Republican.
but he was a liberal.
But that,
In a sense, it's
but
what
I
I'm
know,
saying,
but
yeah.
the point, what I'm saying is, the point is, the Republican definition at that time is different than a Republican definition
Correct.
now. A Republican then would not argue for an amendment to force states to follow along with the federal government.
Yeah.
There's no way, it wouldn't happen. But, so we've shifted. So yeah, the idea of progression ending, I mean, no, we're always adapting to whatever's going on, and we should be, because we're never done. We're growing, we're interacting. How are things going to change? What does progression mean as far as, I mean, how we deal with one another electronically? How we interact with one another? What is free, what is not? What are you allowed to do? What aren't you allowed to do? Where do you limit rights and where do you allow things and so on? I mean, that right now we're entering into this idea, which I don't even know what progression's going to mean with that. So how we interact with one another electronically is a whole new area where we have to understand what we all mean by that definition of progression. Because we're going to have to legislate that. We've already only just begun doing so, but we're just going to have to continue to do so more. So, progression is going to continue and it's never going to stop.
Yeah. All right. I got a lot more, but in the interest of time, we'll shift gears. So Phil, what is a conservative, and why is that important to you?
I can't say definitively what a conservative is. I can give you an idea of why I consider myself conservative. And
Okay.
I'd start by saying that his opening statement about why he considers himself a liberal, so much of that I actually agree with. A lot of the things he said that play into the fact that he considers himself a liberal are things that I, to a certain extent, agree with him on. And to me, there aren't any real absolute black and whites or litmus tests that determine whether you are a conservative or a liberal, because there are so many different issues that come into that discussion. Taxes, local government, and the size of the federal government, local control. And you can sit in a lot of different places on that spectrum in terms of how large you think government should be, or the question of how much should people be taxed. I mean, that's a tough question. For me, the reason I consider myself a conservative comes down to a lot of things, but three really important things. And to me, I call them the 3 L's. Less government, local control, and lower taxes. But I want to expand upon that a little bit. When I say less government, I mean as little government as possible. When I say less taxes, I mean taxes as low as possible. When I say local control, I mean as much local control as possible. I say as possible because I do believe that taxes serve a purpose, that we need to tax because of a lot of the reasons that my friend here said earlier. I do believe that if we didn't tax, we wouldn't have the public safety institutions that we have. I do believe that taxes are necessary to take care of some people in our society who legitimately need to be taken care of. I think where we might differ and where we might come into the area where, we consider ourselves a liberal or a conservative has to do with to what extent do we tax people and what's the definition of that legitimate use of taxes. I do believe that a federal government is necessary and that federal oversight is necessary over states and local governments. I think where we might differ is the amount of oversight and control that the federal government should have over states' rights and states' interests. So it's a big spectrum. I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of conservatives who I know who think that I'm a liberal because I'm not as conservative as they are on a lot of different issues. I found that in a lot of cases, and tell me if you disagree with me, but people decide whether they are conservative or liberal based on very few specific issues. They may decide that they are conservative because they're big on the Second Amendment, but they might be all for instance, legalizing marijuana or having much less authoritarian laws when it comes to drug use. They may decide that they are conservative because they are very much against abortion, but they have other views that other people might consider more liberal. And I think the same can be said for a lot of people who consider themselves liberal. It comes down to really specific issues that are part of a spectrum of what makes us the political animals that we are. And it's so hard now to say, this person's a conservative, this person is a liberal, this person's, well, you can easily say whether someone's a Republican or Democrat because by definition, whatever you are registered as is your political affiliation. Whether or not you're conservative or liberal, I think it's a wide spectrum, and I can tell you why I consider myself, first and foremost, a conservative, but I will temper that by saying that there are some views that I have that some conservatives think are a little bit more liberal. I could keep going. Do you have specific questions for me?
Well, I mean, yeah, I have a lot. I'm trying to formulate them in a way that, because one of the things that we're both talking about is taxes, and so obviously that's a kind of a big issue, but it's still kind of a very broad issue. You're saying lower taxes.
As low as
possible.
necessary.
Yeah,
as
as
low
possible.
as
Yeah.
possible.
So what does that mean? I mean, are you saying as low as possible so what is necessary for taxes? I mean,
Well, first and foremost, I think the main reason that we tax the populace is to, actually, let's get much more broad than that. I think the reason government exists, first and foremost, is to is to protect the people that it governs. And by protecting them, I mean taking care of them, making sure that their welfare is provided for. That's a tricky word to use, welfare, but it really is to make sure their welfare is taken care of. First and foremost among that comes their physical safety. Okay, we're talking about safety services. We're talking about police. We're talking about fire. We're talking about our military, first and foremost. Beyond that, we're also talking about, to some extent, social programs. Social programs, I think, they're bloated with a lot of waste and unnecessary programs, but I do think that there are people out there who legitimately need social services and who need help from the government because they cannot legitimately provide for themselves. Listen, we live in a society where I think we have sympathy, empathy, and caring for people who cannot take care of themselves. We're a very affluent society, and I think and this is one of the reasons that I consider myself a conservative, I think that we are morally responsible to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. Having said that, and that's a point where some conservatives will say, wait a second, you're sounding like a liberal. I think where you and I might disagree is who those people are who legitimately can't take care of themselves and to what extent we need to take from others in order to give to those people who say they can't take care of themselves. I think that much of our social programs, much of our welfare system is wasted on people who, if they were, if they were given the ability to do so, could take care of themselves much better than they're doing now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But I also, could you also see with that same sense how some could see that that isn't always true?
How do you mean?
For some in our society who we say they could be doing better for themselves, that whole pull them up by the bootstraps type mentality. There was an old preacher in the 70s that said, it's hard to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps when somebody keeps cutting the straps. So this would be a typical person of color who will, they're trying to work hard, they're trying to do better, and then all of a sudden they get pulled over, and there's an incident, and now they're arrested, and now they're a convicted felon. And even though they were trying to do the right thing, they were trying to toe the line and better themselves better than the government could, but yet the government stepped in, and now they're in the system. And now they're not able to get back to where they once were because they have this felon tag that's on them that lasts forever. And that's not, we all know that those stories have taken place.
Absolutely.
And so it's not always easy for somebody who has the ability to work hard to do so, because there's always that somebody that might be trying to cut them down to stop them from getting to a certain point.
What's your question?
How do we begin to look at those people and say, this is somebody that the system failed?
So felons specifically?
Not just felon, that's just a specific.
Yeah, if somebody's has a felony record for, to have a felony record, you have to do something you have to be convicted of something that's fairly serious. I don't blame employers for thinking twice about hiring someone who has a felony. If you could maybe get a little more specific about how the system holds people back from succeeding beyond just they have a felony conviction. Because I think that a lot of people who are looking for work and can't find it, it's not necessarily because they have a felony conviction.
Mm-hmm. Well, not all of it. Access to education. Not everybody has the same access to education. Some people aren't able to score high enough on the college placement exams to be able to get into a decent college. Some people aren't able to take on the debt that's required to get a college education. And so,
well, anyone can take on debt.
Well, I understand, but realistically, when you're looking at, I'm going to go to an associate's degree, and it's going to cost, maybe $25,000, $30,000. I'm only going to be making so much money a year. Is it worth that investment when I can just, get a job at McDonald's? And
I don't think college always is worth the investment. In fact, I think a lot of people will make much more money if they don't go to college and then instead learn a trade. And the amount of money that I make, when I look at how much debt I have from student loans and how much I'm paying a month now, just trying to pay it down. And I'm almost 40 years old. I'll be honest with you. It's going to take me many years to pay down my student loans. I think a lot of people going, and we're getting into another topic entirely, but going and learning a trade will, in a lot of cases, earn them a lot more money over their lifetime than going to college and going into debt for it. I think college is great, by the way. I'm not saying people shouldn't. There's this new movement now that a lot of conservatives say that college is a bad thing and people shouldn't necessarily go to college. I think it's terrific. I want my children to go to college. I'm going to encourage them to go to college. I'm going to help them go to college. But if someone wants to learn a trade, start out at the bottom rung, learn the trade, move their way up, and then eventually own a business, in a lot of cases they'll make a heck of a lot more money by doing that. I just sort of moved us away from your original question about the deck being stacked against people who want to succeed. I apologize.
And so one of the L's, one of your 3 L's, local control.
Mm-hmm.
One of the arguments that I've heard against that is your typical local government, and this may have been more true in the past than it is now, but local governments tended to be more corrupt. There tended to be more cronyism, more nepotism, because there wasn't as much oversight, and once the guy was elected mayor, everybody's going to elect him mayor because he's the mayor, and so it can lead to some sort of a lot of fraud and a lot of abuse of power. And so therefore, the government needs to step in more. We need to have more federal control to stop that kind of stuff. How would you argue against that?
Well, first of all, if you don't think that there's nepotism and cronyism in the federal government, then
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's widespread, but one of the arguments against local control is that it's more widespread locally than.
And then, listen, I know a lot of local government institutions. I've been an elected official for almost a decade now. I can't believe it's been that long, but there's a lot of nepotism and cronyism in local government. I think government, by its nature, because you have people in charge who are putting other people in positions of power, those people, humans in general, will decide to surround themselves by people they trust. And in a lot of cases, the people they trust are people they've known a long time, or what might be family members. I think you'll have that problem in all levels of government, not just on the local level. Does it exist? Absolutely. I see it all the time. In the county, not so much in the municipality, just because it's a lot tougher with a smaller. So with a smaller government, with a smaller system of government like a municipality where I live, hiring your brother or your sister-in-law or something is noticeable right away by a lot of people who live in the community. The larger government gets, the larger that machine gets, I think the easier it is to give kickbacks, hire people you know, hire family members, bring benefit to people who've done you political or business favors. So I think that the argument that local government is more apt to suffer from some of the ills of like nepotism and cronyism, I think kind of falls flat. I think in a larger bureaucracy that abuses and nepotism and cronyism are much more likely to happen, much more likely to be widespread, and much more likely to not be, less likely to be noticed. So that's one of the reasons why I think smaller sections of government, smaller local governments that take care of their own areas is a good thing.
So, now what questions have you guys had for each other? What are you hearing him say? What are you hearing him say?
I mean, honestly, as I said, a lot of what he says, I agree with. I think it's the degree to which we think that these ideals should be taken.
Correct.
How far they should be taken. I think that's what. So I think we've already stumbled upon the things we have in common as Americans. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I would argue that even the most dyed-in-the-wool conservative, if you really ask them for their opinion, would agree that some taxes are necessary. They would agree that a local police force is a positive thing to have. They would agree that paving the roads is a good thing. That it's the amount of taxes and how much is necessary that we're going to have a discussion and maybe disagree with on a little bit. But he said it's two sides of the same coin. It really is. Both of us agree, and I think most conservatives and liberals would agree, that we need to have taxes. It's what we have those taxes for and how far we go with taxes where we will disagree.
Right.
Well, see, I might disagree with that.
Do you think we should have no taxes?
No. I'm just saying that I think there would be some that would push that limit, because we've seen in this country some communities that have moved to a private fire department. That they've pushed to have private business maintain the roads, that they pushed to have private schools public schools kicked out. And we're facing a situation here in some of our local school districts where they could be potentially shutting down the public schools and making them private charter schools. And so I think that there is a push from some of the far right to make as much things private as we can. I mean, they've made great inroads in privatizing prisons, and how well has that gone over?
And I had said earlier, as little
Correct.
taxes as necessary.
Correct.
But what is the definition of success with privatized institutions like prisons and everything? Because then that's where I think liberals and conservatives will disagree. Because I think generally speaking, you're going to have a situation like that where they're going to say, well, those people got themselves in trouble and they shouldn't be there in the first place, so they can avoid a privatized criminal institution by just staying out of trouble. And then the liberal might say, Right, but then you look at the people that run these businesses that are actually working with legislators, and there's particular legislation that's written to push for getting people to fill these prisons. So then, because there's cronyism, corruption, which exists for liberals and conservatives, clearly, so that's obvious.
Yeah.
But because that exists, that, yeah, if you privatize that, you make it monetary to have bad guys.
Yeah.
If you privatize education, you monetize student success, which we already don't even know how to measure student success and teacher success. And so now when you see schools fail, which I believe as a liberal, it should be the government's responsibility to ensure that their people are educated. So regardless of liberal or conservative, you can have an education and grow up with an opportunity to go wherever it is that you want to go, regardless of political affiliation. But the thing is, if you monetize those kids, then you have areas that will do that, and businesses fail because besides that broad term, private schools, charter schools have failed. And what happens to those communities and those kids in those communities? The government is failing generations.
Mm-hmm.
They're failing a whole section of kids. So then what's going to happen to those kids? They're not going to be educated. It's going to be tough for them to get a job. Tough for them to get a job means they're going to need some sort of support system probably for a while from the government. If that support system doesn't exist, then let's assume that they're not felons. That they're working multiple jobs at the same time to try and take care of their kids. But because they're working multiple jobs and they have a hard time taking care of themselves, they can't get themselves beyond menial labor, unless somebody might be in a position where they actually were able to learn a trade, then they can move up in a business. But generally speaking, then the cycle just repeats itself. So if the government doesn't take care of this particular area of society, then we have a cancer that grows. And eventually, the cancer grows to a big enough point where it becomes a social situation. I think historically speaking, it's not hard to see that has happened. So again, if you move toward privatization too often. Now, this is not including the potential discussion, I've had with people about privatizing, for instance, in communities that have done this, like trash pickup. That's something that everybody hates if it doesn't happen. Everybody is on the same side that it needs to be fixed. And so then if your taxes aren't taking care of that, if you've got a private industry that doesn't do that, then okay, then your victim in that sense occurs, generally speaking, across the board. But if you talk about necessary systems like education, privatization like that, or when we talked about doing more, I think it was Kasich that talked about doing more turnpike style stuff, privatizing roads and everything. I'm just generally not keen on that. But that's only a generalization.
Yeah.
That's
So-
if we saw enough of
Yeah.
that,
So part of the hard part of doing some of these things is because we all have biases, and it's trying to keep those biases at bay. And one of my
Right.
biases is prison reform and felon reform. I think the prison system right now is a big problem. The prison industrial complex, the fact that these guys aren't criminals, they're investments, and if we can keep them in the cycle, we can keep getting paid for them.
Right.
And then, once you're a felon, the fact that you're basically stripped of a lot of your rights as a human being because of a mistake you made when you were 18 and now you're 50 and you're still paying for it, I think there's a level of double jeopardy there. So
I can't really disagree with
yeah.
you on that,
So
so I'm not going to
yeah.
be able to.
So the reason why I brought that up twice is it's kind of just my bias being interjecting.
Yeah.
As much as I try not to have that interject, because those are just issues that are important to me. And
I agree.
a lot of
I
the fields that I'm in.
I just don't want to assume for the sake of argument that the reason that someone can't, get a good job is because they have a felony record. I know that there are a lot of people out there that's a problem, but I think much more often it's for other reasons that they can't move up or.
Yeah. Where was I going? Something that you had said, we were talking about, privatization. One of the things that you had mentioned was capitalism. And I'm assuming that you're a capitalist.
I love capitalism.
So one of the things that I heard the other day or recently, once again, not saying I agree or disagree, but they said that the problem is that in capitalism, the focus is on the stuff, it's on the capital, it's on the product. Where socialism, the focus is on the social, it's on the person. So when we live in a capitalistic society, our main objective is to make sure our businesses are secure. Where socialistic society, main objective is to make sure that the person is secure. How do you see that? Either one. Go ahead if you want.
Okay, well, you clearly need both, and I mean clearly. You clearly need capitalism, but you can't have unfettered capitalism. It's that simple. We've broken up industries because it becomes contrary to taking care of our people. Because when the industry gets to the point, as it does in capitalism, where it's about making more money for the top, then that doesn't serve the people. Then the people are not taken care of, and the government is failing them because they're being abused by the system. Having strikers not being allowed to strike, and then having the business owners call in people to rough up the strikers. Having physical violence handed down to these people because capitalism rules. Because you're not working for me, fine, you're less than, and I can be violent towards you. The government needs to step in those situations. But socialism doesn't work unless you have somebody generating revenue. You have to have taxes. Taxes got to come from somewhere. The people have to have money in their pockets because they're working for a business that's working well. And the business is working well because it's got some form of capitalism going for it. It's got the ability as a business to innovate and not be restrained and be able to come up with something new. But yeah, capitalism, you could certainly allow more bottom line revenue for a business owner if Jiffy Lube is allowed to dump their used oil into the sewers. But in North Olmsted, I want to be able to drink the water. And I need my government to tell them, no, don't do that. No, I like being able to go to Lake Erie, unlike my father when they shut down the beach for Lake Erie. Because you can't swim because there's too much garbage in it, so we can have the Cuyahoga River catch on fire again. But, you know, you can't go too far with socialism because then there's no revenue. Then if you're trying to take care of everybody, then you have that fun little paradox of who's deciding what's good for everybody. All you've done essentially at that point is you've given the decision, even in a democracy, you've given the decision to a few people to decide what's best for everybody. So when you have this wonderful relationship of capitalism and socialism, then which is again, how do we get to our definition of, what is progression, where we're constantly fighting this battle with one another of capitalist and socialist. But yeah, I mean, we have to exist together. Unfettered capitalism is bad. Socialism to the point where it's, it's impossible. You can't achieve it. So
I agree with a whole lot of what he said there. There are a few exceptions I would take to some of the things he said, but I completely agree. You can't have unfettered anything. I love the idea of a system where a business can succeed or fail based on how well they provide services to people who need them. I love the idea of a system where if somebody works hard, they're able to create an institution that not only benefits them, but also a large number of people who are employed by that institution. I think that our country is great in part because we have so many families who are provided for by companies that have given them jobs in this capitalist system that allows them to take care of their families. And I think in a lot of those cases, those companies were built by people who worked hard, who had an idea, who capitalized on it, and who, by definition, needed other people to help them make that vision a reality. Is capitalism perfect? No, not at all. But I think it is the best system that we have, that we've explored. And I'll tell you what, in terms of people at the top making more than people at the bottom, I'm not one of the people at the top. I never will be. My boss makes a whole lot more than I do. I do have a full-time job that I go to every single day. And I'm nothing but thankful to him for the time and effort he put into building his company and giving me an opportunity to work there and provide for my family. I think that in the vast majority of cases, companies in our country were built by people who worked hard and who who bled and sweated in order to make something a reality out of a dream that they had. I think there's a small minority of companies that take advantage of the system and that don't play on a level playing field with the rest of the companies in our capitalistic society. I think there does need to be a situation where we have a level playing field where all companies are playing by the same rules, and that no company, I mean monopolies, for example, are illegal for a reason. Obviously, any company that's abusing people, beating up people who go on strike, polluting the environment, obviously that's not a good thing, and we have laws in place to make sure that that's illegal. I don't know that that's necessarily a problem with capitalism as much as it is with individuals trying to exploit the system, and I would hope that in most of the cases it would be caught and taken care of.
One of the main things that I think govern both ideologies at their core is a sense of morality. And so anytime we see somebody who wants to take advantage of that, whether it's a CEO that wants to try to take advantage of his employees, or a CEO who wants to take advantage and dump oil down a sewer drain, we have that common sense of there is a sense of right and wrong. But how do we get to there may be the question, right? How do we find that, the balance between, how do I want to say that? We all know that there's this something in the middle that's good. We just have different approaches as to how to go about getting there, right? We both Republicans and Democrats want America to be great, right? We want this to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we want everybody to have a good, well-paying job and to get a good education. Our objectives are the same, but we have vastly different approaches as to how to get there. So part of my quest is, and part of what we're doing here today is try to find a way where we can both come at it from different perspectives and work together to get to the same position, right? So how do you guys see this kind of playing out in our country right now? And once again, I know it might be hard to stay abstract, and that's okay. But because we are so polarized, but yet the objectives are the same. Get people jobs, get people educations, get the people who are, the people who are on, an entitlement program that can get off of it, let's work to get them off of it. If there's the people who absolutely have to, they're dependent upon that entitlement program, let's make sure that they have the resources they need and they're taken care of, and they're, we're not killing people by taking away the program that they're dependent upon. So our objectives are the same, but why are we so vastly separated? Why are we to the point where, there was a story of, there was a Republican senator who co-sponsored a bill with a Democrat, and he lost his primary for re-election because his opponent said he's working for the enemy. All because they co-sponsored a bill together, and I believe the Democrat lost his primary as well for the same reason. I'd have to fact check that to be sure. But just because I did my job and I worked with somebody who was elected to do the same job I was, you're firing me. And so where did this type of polarization come from when our objectives are the same? And how do we fix it?
I wish I could tell you. I think tribalism is one of the biggest challenges we face, and one of the biggest things that's wrong with our country, to be honest with you. And I think beyond tribalism, by tribalism, I use that term because it goes beyond just Republican and Democrat. It goes beyond just conservative and liberal. I think that more and more politically people are starting to separate themselves into these separate tribes. And if anyone says anything against their particular tribe, that they tend to demonize those people and say that they need to be punished because they have different views. I think it's a huge problem for us, both for conservatives and for liberals, both for Democrats and Republicans. And another thing that's becoming a much bigger problem is, I think, cults of personality as well. You see it on both sides. People who, it's not just this person is a Republican, so I'm going to follow him blindly. It's this person is this person, and anything this person says, regardless how, and this isn't just Republicans or Democrats, it's both sides, it's all issues.
Pop culture.
How does Sanders come out of nowhere when he's been around forever?
Yeah.
But all of a sudden,
Yeah, it's people's tendency to get drawn into cults of personality, and it's,
Good point.
I think it's really dangerous, but I also think that it's something that humanity's had to deal with for millennia. It's until we reach a point where we can get beyond becoming starstruck by cults of personality. I think it's going to be really difficult for us to go beyond that. Whenever you have a figure who a large group of people take at face value everything that person says, no matter how ridiculous, it's very difficult to get beyond it. And again, that's not just Republicans, it's not just Democrats. You can find examples on both sides. I think until people start being more critical of our leaders, even those who they voted for, until they're able to actually admit when people they voted for and people they follow are, when they're wrong, that it's going to be really tough to do. Just because I voted for somebody, or just because I agree with them on 90% of the issues, doesn't mean I'm not going to say if they, and I'm not going to say it if they do something stupid. I'll gladly say if somebody I voted for, hey, I disagree with that. We're at a point in our society now where even if you voted for somebody, even if you supported them, if you dare say, well, wait a second, guys, maybe this isn't such a good idea, that those people who were still enraptured by that cult of personality, these tribalists, I've called them cultists in a way, will, they don't just want to shut you up, they want to harm you. Because you differ from them, and there's a lot on the left, there's a lot on the right now too, because you differ from them on one single thing, because you're not 100% with them on every single issue, you need to be shut up, and in some cases you need to be physically harmed or put away. And I see that more and more, and it scares me a lot.
I think to go back to what you were saying though, well, there are two things. One, that the definition, I truly don't think that, generally speaking, everyone has the same understanding of what makes this country great, because your history and what you understand about the country and the direction that you think it needs to go, those are going to dictate what you think the end result should be. Mm-hmm. That's going to involve foreign policy. That's going to involve not only how we deal with one another, but also how we deal with the other. When it comes time for war, when do you or when do you not? So unfortunately, I think generally speaking, even still generally, we don't have an agreement necessarily. I mean, you can go as abstract as you want and say, I want my kids to be taken care of. Okay, but even then, we're probably going to differ on what that means when our kids are taken care of. But the second part is, why is everyone, I think, so aggressive when it comes to it? Because if you don't agree with what I believe about how things are supposed to be done, your difference of opinion, and if that follows through to my understanding of its logical end result, puts me in harm. I am now going to be economically or physically in trouble because of the decisions your party wants to make. And I think that's the problem with why it's so aggressive right now. And so the cult of personality, which is excellent, and then when you also throw fear into that ridiculous fire, fan the flames constantly, and then now it's even worse. Now what you're doing is going to hurt me here, and it's going to hurt me here, and it's going to hurt me here, and everything has to be stopped now, and yeah, and it's, relax. It's not that bad. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
I think things are pretty bad right now. Like pretty bad.
Because one of the things that we talk about.
Well, but real quick, what I think is pretty bad, I don't think is what the other side thinks is pretty bad. Which that's what's pretty bad to me.
Yeah. So, because one of the things that when you were thinking maybe kind of sparked something in my mind was that I think every generation in this country has looked at it and said, yeah, this country's been pretty polarized all throughout, right? I mean, you can look at the 90s and the Clinton scandal, you can look at some of the stuff that went on with Reagan and the Iran-Contra stuff. There's always been this other side that's been trying to bring down the other side. And there's always had this kind of polarization. The name slips me right now. It might have been Kasich. Was Kasich ever a senator?
No.
Or was he in Congress?
He was in Congress.
Okay, so I think it was Kasich was talking about the difference between Congress then and Congress now, and he said, you know, when I was in Congress, we would fight to the death on the floor. But then afterwards, we would go home and we'd get our wives and we'd go out to dinner and we would talk about the kids, you know, we would talk about different things. And today, that doesn't happen. Not only are my enemy on the floor, but you're my enemy in life. And I think it was Al Franken was recently he was on The Daily Show. And he was talking about Jeff Sessions, and about how his wife made a baby blanket for his granddaughter, and how they, you know, even though that they hated each other when they were talking, they still had some sort of relationship, but that's not really happening anymore, and that's kind of gone away. And so I think there is, what you're saying is that it is worse than it's been in the past. That, yeah, we had Republicans that were trying to get a president impeached and were kind of fanning the flames there, but it wasn't the hatred, it wasn't the, you know, I mean, you didn't have congressmen getting shot at a baseball game. You didn't have a congresswoman getting shot at an event at a grocery store. You weren't, you know what I mean, like congressmen and women weren't going around fearing for their lives because of the way that they voted on a specific issue. And so, is it to a point where it can't be fixed? There's so much hatred, there's so much tension, there's so much animosity that what can fix that? What can we do to bridge that gap? And is this where we start? Does it have to start local and spread? Or do we have to just fire everybody of our elected officials? You know, there's some that say we need to fire all the senators and all the congressmen and start over. I don't think that's appropriate, because I think we need some level of experience in both houses. But how do we, or how can we begin to bridge that gap?
I will tell you, I don't know what you believe, but I do believe a lot of this starts at the top, and I don't want to sound cliched, but I think that the person who is in the highest office of the land sets the tone for what what the atmosphere is going to be like. And I think if you have people who are elected to the highest offices who make the decision that we are going to be amicable with each other, that even if we have disagreements, we are still going to be friendly with each other, that we're all Americans, that you're not going to personally put people down because of the way they look or whether they're male or female, that you're going to focus on the substantive issues, be a happy warrior, so to speak, that trickles down and sort of sets the tone for a lot of other locally elected officials who look to the head of their party or the head of their particular ideology to set the tone for how they're going to act. I'm not necessarily talking about our president right now. This could go for Democrats as well. But I think having someone at the top in the higher offices who set that tone, who say, listen, we are going to fight on the floor of Congress. We are going to fight when we're in our offices about substantive issues. But afterwards, we're going to go have dinner with each other, and our families are going to get to know each other. I think that would help out a lot. I don't see a lot of it. I wish we did. And I wish that people, when they were electing people to these higher offices, that one of the things that was important to them was that person's temperament, how they treat others, how they approach these issues, and whether they focus on the substantive issues and not other things that distract from that.
Anything there?
Well, I mean, there's a clear deviation from, if we're going to go back to the 90s and then prior, talking about the difference, then it's 9/11.
Yeah.
So after that, more nationalists than we'd been, at least in my short lifetime. The sense that the decisions that we make are generally life or death. Finding out that our government lied to us as far as why we were doing what we were doing. Ending up with the mess that we did, which was draining our economy. And then we had the economic collapse. People have been scared, and then they've been deprived, unlike my generation and then our parents' generation have ever seen. baby boomers didn't have to deal with stuff like this. They had to deal with very serious issues, social issues in the 60s. And they also had to deal with the threat of nuclear war, going toe to toe with somebody else. But even still, that was a general clear, that's them, this is us. You know, this might not even be a good argument anyway, just because then we still had McCarthy pointing fingers, threatening to name names. They're un-American because there's the possibility of them being Soviet sympathizers. So, cult of personality yet again, and the use of fear to push agenda.
So,
And I think post 9/11, because you had the economic boom in the 90s, so everyone's pretty happy.
see, I always point to the 2000 election, where, you know, it was so close, and we have hanging chads, and we had Dimples, and he conceded, but he stole it, and they've got lawyers involved, and
Right.
you know, weeks before we even knew who the president was and who the president was going to be, and then that for me is just kind of when it started. You know, I mean, the snowball left the hill, and it's just been getting bigger and getting faster all the way down. But because you can point to those times in history. I mean, we aren't actively engaged at war with each other, so it's not as bad as it was at one point in time. And you know, we don't necessarily have witch hunts going on, you know, like with McCarthy. But so is this something that is just kind of cyclical, where we kind of go through these peaks and valleys of, you know, just real hatred and animosity, and then we kind of work together for a while, and then something happens, and so is that just kind of the way it's going to be?
I think you may have a good point. And keep in mind that we tend to overinflate things that we're living through at the time. And as you said, you know, we've gone through periods in our history where hundreds of thousands of people died because of some of our political differences. And things aren't as bad now as they have been in the past. Is it cyclical? I don't know. I think we need to keep in mind that in the beginning of our country, it was common for politicians who disagreed with each other to have duels and actually kill each other over these kind of issues. It doesn't happen very often nowadays. I think we need to have some. We need to understand where we came from and where we are now, and appreciate the fact that we still pretty much live in a society where we don't physically harm each other for political differences, with some exceptions.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up on 8:30. Does anybody have any questions or comments or observations?
From at any time, like even if it was something an hour ago?
I love a few hand I think the issue of taxation is pretty much resolved. Our revolution was never a revolution for no taxation, period. It was a revolution for no taxation without representation. In fact, the English probably could have kept us as a colony, and we'd probably still be part of the empire had King George simply said, okay, give the colonies a seat.
Yeah, they worked pretty hard with trying to not go to war.
Yeah, they probably could have, but King George in Parliament didn't want it.
He was a tyrant.
Because the colonies were a cash cow. They really were a cash cow. And so King George and Parliament worked really, really hard to keep the colonies out of the decision-making process. So it is no taxation without representation. And you are part of that representation. And so, I agree with you that yes, taxation needs to be as much as necessary. But it's never going to go down. It's always going to be more because there are always going to be more services that are going to be needed. We have a failing infrastructure. I drive to Cleveland on a regular basis on crumbling bridges that need to be repaired. And they need to be repaired through state funding in some way, shape, or form. And that's going to require taxation. Every federal tax dollar that is rebated back needs to be made up by either the states or the local communities, because those states and local communities still need to pay for those services. I'm not necessarily comfortable being protected by police officers who are paid minimum wage. Minimum means they're going to give me minimum protection, which then goes into a Second Amendment issue. Okay, so if the police aren't going to protect me, I need to protect myself. So taxation. Second of all, how should taxes be taken care of? I think it's in the preamble of the Constitution, already very clearly stated. To form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, we do use the term welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. In 1787, welfare would have meant well-being, as in the common phrase fare thee well, farewell, meaning well-being. So the founding fathers intended for governments, federal, state, and local, to help take care of the well-being of the people. And that includes police and fire, but also includes taking care of the least of the people, the ones who need it the most. Jay had all this things I was going to say. I would extend, I consider myself a liberal. I would extend the meaning of liberal to mean that things are shared not equally, but among everyone. We have we have a biblical passage in which we learn about the early Christians who were contributing as they were able and taking as they needed. Your example of the American concentration camp, that group had come together into a social contract in which they said, we are going to share everything equally. An outside entity gave them supplies on a condition that that group was unwilling to submit to. As a group, under that social contract group, that man was bucking the social contract. And therefore, he was immoral and amoral, where everyone else had a moral responsibility to share. Private industry and capitalism blending with socialism can be done very quickly and very easily through a number of experiments that have worked fairly well, and that is as an industry or a business becomes fairly self-sufficient, create partial or complete employee ownership, in which the employees are the board of directors and the CEOs owe fiduciary responsibility to, they already owe fiduciary responsibility to the board of directors. But if your board of directors is the people who you employ, then you will be making decisions that benefit not only them, but the customers as well. And that would be an appropriate blend of socialism and capitalism in order to make that happen. Because right now, what you have are boards of directors of companies who are made up of the same people across several different boards of directors. And so those boards of directors and those stakeholders, rather, is what we call them, stakeholders, you have a very small group of stakeholders, and the employees are simply cogs in the machine. We refer to employees today as human resources. We no longer refer to them as personnel. Personnel is a pretty bad word too, at least it has the word person. is they would call it human resources. I'm a human resource, I'm nothing like a lump of coal that you dig out of the ground is a resource. I'm a human resource. And I think that's where business gets people wrong. So yeah, so it is taxation with representation. There is no question that we as Americans knew that we were going to be taxed, and it was never a fight for no taxation period. It was always a fight to have us being able to decide what taxes we were going to collect and how we were going to distribute them. And I think the Constitution does state that it's for the welfare of the general welfare. To them, that meant well-being. And if that means that helps some people who maybe don't want to help, maybe that help. I think I want to go back to sort of the definition of liberalism. For me, it means that I do not see life as a zero-sum game. In other words, in order for me to succeed, it doesn't mean that you have to fail, or you have to fail. All three of us can succeed together. And that's what liberalism is that we spread success liberally. The term means to spread it around. A liberal education is where you learn a little bit from a number of different places.
I want to inject real fast. You make a great point there. And actually, I think the most successful businesses nowadays realize that they can't succeed without helping others succeed. In other words, in order to build a good business, you have to rely on other people to help you provide services. And those businesses that compensate and help those people who are assisting them to the best degree become more successful. Would you agree with that?
Yes, however, many businesses have discovered that they can make twice as much profit with half as many employees. And most businesses don't move out of communities because the new communities will give them more tax breaks. They move simply because they have discovered, because of changes in automation or whatever, they look out and they go, we can make twice as much profit with half as many employees. So let's move our corporate headquarters halfway across the country, and we give a 2-year severance package to everybody here not to come with us. We move all the way across the country, we open a new business, we open a new office, fully automated, and we hire half as many employees. That's why I'm saying those people have been left in the way. They really are stakeholders, and they have not been treated like stakeholders. Then we have the issues of outdated industries. We cannot continue to resurrect outdated industries. We have to, like you said, it's progress. We have to move forward.
We're not going to keep using cassette tapes because we have 1,000 VCR repairmen.
Correct.
We can't be worried about the VCR repairmen going out of business,
Correct.
so we can't transition to a DVD.
For instance, coal mining is largely automated. We're not going to put coal miners back to work as coal miners, but we can put them back to work as mechanics who are maintaining and fixing, building the machines that are doing the coal mining.
Or we can
Or do we even need coal mining, or can we just convert these people and put them to work, building turbines and building and installing solar panels
Yeah.
instead?
So that's where I was, it's not so much, because coal is a dying industry regardless of automation. It's just, we're just moving away from the need of coal. So instead of retraining them for the business of coal, let's retrain them for a business that we're building. Like a business, the business that doesn't exist yet, that we're going to need 100,000 employees for by 2025. Let's begin training them for that now. Because we know by 2025, we're going to be very much, the dependence on coal and fossil fuels is going to be going tremendously down. I mean, rapidly. I firmly believe in the next year or two, we're going to see that dependency just drop because.
The cost of solar panels.
Well, because they're becoming so much more effective, they're becoming smaller. I mean, you know, Tesla now, you can put shingles on your roof that are solar powered and can continue to conduct electricity. Even I think they even said even off the moon.
Right.
You know what I mean, so it's even night and day.
It
It's
doesn't need to be sunlight.
yeah.
We, every single one of us has a calculator in our desk that we put in the desk and we close the desk drawer. We have to pull it open, we go use the calculator, we open it up, and we put it underneath the incandescent light, and wow, it powered up. Any kind of light, doesn't need to be created by the sun.
So
Actually, I got 2 more points before I get them.
I like your points.
All right,
I wanna-
first point, CEOs and business magnates today are not taught the same social mores as business magnates and CEOs 100 years ago. John D. Rockefeller was taught by his pastor in his church. You know, JD, it's really nice that you've made tons of money, but you now have, now in your retirement, you have a moral responsibility to give back to the society. That's what it happened.
yeah, but wasn't it also
Foundations.
Rockefeller who was ordering his striking workers to be shot in Pittsburgh?
Exactly.
Yeah,
No, and I
to
agree
be
with that.
fair though, 100 years ago with the robber barons, that Teddy had to
Exactly.
break up.
Exactly.
So-
But let's also remember that the J.D. Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans, and so forth were taught a gospel in which their pastor sat them down and said, look, you've done all of this crappy stuff all throughout your life, and you've shot up your employees and people, and you've made a fortune out of it. Now you have an obligation to give back to that society. You have both harmed and helped. And many of our CEOs today are not being taught that through their own churches or their own pastoring. Shoot.
Is that a question, is that a question of lack of religious leadership for these people that doesn't produce this? Or is it just that the people are simply immoral?
I think
I'm
it's-
misunderstanding
I think
that
it's
point.
I think it's partially a failure of capitalism because we've now monetized morality.
Right, but again, with capitalism, you've always monetized
Yeah.
that.
And-
And
and
that's
we-
the thing with capitalism though in general is that, again, it's great for success because historical accident thanks to that after World War II, like we have all of our infrastructure and all our factories and nobody else in Europe does.
Yeah.
Hey man, let's make everything for everybody.
Right.
And then America's #1. Well, America just
And then
happens
we
to
al-
not
we
have been
also-
beat up.
Yeah, but see, I
We
would
also took a moral high road to rebuild those
Yeah.
industries with the Germans and with the Japanese
so,
after World War II.
but I would say there
There
were.
was struggling.
Yeah.
There was struggling, but we were the driving force behind helping Germany and Japan rebuild their industries. And it wasn't because we wanted them to be able to compete with us. It was because we wanted to have a strong capitalist.
No, yeah, we ran
Ring.
Japan for what, 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
To push back the onslaught of the communist regime in Russia.
But so
it
I-
made sense for us to rebuild Germany's industries in order for Germany to be a strong capitalist society to be that.
Well, right, if you can
to be that
recreate them in your own
bulwark of
image.
Germany. Exactly.
But so I hate to be the guy that points out the exception to the rule because I recognize that all rules have exceptions and
I'm not
the
stating-
rules exist
I'm
because
not
they're
stating
exceptions.
any rules.
But when you have
I am stating-
but when you have
I'm
a,
not
yeah,
stating
yeah.
rules.
But when you have a guy, because you're talking about today's CEOs and because I would venture to say that today's CEOs are more philanthropic or did I say that right?
Philanthropic.
Philanthropic than previous. You have a guy like Bill Gates who said, I spent the first half of my life making more money than I could ever spend. I'm going to spend the second half of my life seeing how much of it I can spend on somebody else. Mark Zuckerberg giving millions of dollars. Tesla, or not Tesla, but Elon Musk,
Elon Musk, yeah.
giving away millions and billions of dollars.
I will agree with you that that is functionally Bill Gates' philosophy. However, his amount of philanthropy pales in comparison to what he's actually worth, and pales in comparison percentage-wise to people like Rockefeller.
Yeah. Because I would, you know, because I'm kind of arguing against my own interest as a pastor, because I would say,
Yeah, but that's the best
Let's
argument.
put
Yeah.
it this way, there is a Stanford University, there is not a Gates University, okay?
Yeah.
So I as a liberal have some problems with the Bill Gateses, the Mark Zuckerbergs, and the Warren Buffetts who claim to be wealthy liberals because, quite frankly, they're not putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to backing things like public education and so forth. Gates tried to do a lot with private education and computers and so
well, I mean,
forth.
he gave $1 billion,
Found
$1 billion to fighting AIDS in Africa. I think is a pretty worthy cause. But so, because your point was that a lot of those guys were giving because of a religious obligation.
Yes, many of them were. I'm going to say a social and
Yeah,
moral
yeah.
obligation.
So, but today, the
But-
Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerbergs, they're not doing it because their pastor says this is
No.
what God wants you to do. They're doing it because it's the right thing to
They're
do.
doing it because it's the right thing
And I think,
to do.
and I think that's where we need to be moving to,
Exactly.
is doing what's right because it's right, not because you're going to get punished or rewarded by a deity
You are
or
correct.
get a slap on the back. And so, you know, some of the issues that I think that they're giving to, we could critique, but, you know, the fact is that Bill Gates has said his desire is to die poor. And so how he chooses the issues that are put on his heart to spend his money on, who am I to say, well, that's wrong, you should be given to this. I fully recognize that, you know, Vanderbilt made his money and he spent his money making Vanderbilt University. And you know, it's a very, very great school that a lot of people get phenomenal educations at. And so, but Vanderbilt University still makes a phenomenal profit, even though it's a nonprofit. Stanford University makes a great profit, even though it's a nonprofit.
Yes.
And so, some of the things Bill Gates
But what
is
it
not
does,
going to
it
make
puts-
money.
It puts his money back.
Yeah, yeah.
Into the program.
I see that. And so, but I think we can always look at it was better then, but I think we're always going to have some of these CEOs that are going to be keeping all the money for themselves and robbing, and we're always going to have the ones that are giving back.
And I'm going to make this a pop culture reference here, but for me, I always come back to, it's a Billy Joel lyric, yesterday wasn't always good, tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. Last point. I would beg to differ with you that change in the discussion and change in the tone cannot come from the top. It has to come from us. Ideologically, we come to this, you and I come to the table with differing positions and differing ideas of how much taxation is necessary and which programs the taxes should be distributed to. But I find you a very likable person, so it's very difficult for me to have a disliking and discourteous conversation with you one-on-one here. However, I can have very discourteous things to say about those people in Washington. So it needs to start, it really does need to start with city councils and state governments that are bridging the gap and coming together so that the Republican city councilman and the Democratic city councilman, heaven knows when the Libertarians and the Greens are going to start getting elected to city councils, they're going to have to start working together. And if they start working together and have the civil conversations here, it'll eventually trickle up. And there are other parliamentary forms of government
Mhm.
that can dissolve the government when the participants are not able to come together and make appropriate decisions. And we have a parliamentary form of government. We just didn't put any vote of no confidence into our constitutional format. So yes, the entire government could be completely
Well, yeah.
dissolved and completely reelected. And in fact, I think most of the other parliamentary governments around the world do have
Yeah.
that provision.
Well, I think that one of the, I think constitutional law, that's one of the things that was kind of, they've talked a lot about, because a lot of people, a lot of new democratic countries, when they form democracies, and they bring in these constitutional scholars, they're actually trying to get them to move away from the two-party presidential system and go to more of a parliamentary prime minister type of system, because it's a lot more representation than just two parties. You have all these different parties, and whatever party has the majority is, they get the prime minister. And so, obviously we have some things that could take place, but I also see value in having some congressmen that have been congressmen for 20 years. And I think if we did just fire them all and then replace them, so now we have, how many congressmen are there? 435? So now you have 435 people doing a job that they've never done before and nobody there to tell them how to do it. It can be disastrous.
Like in a turtle.
Yeah.
Can be.
Yeah, it
Absolutely
would be disastrous. And that's why I'm not for term limits in Congress or the Senate, because you need those people who have been there for a long time, that know what they're doing, but still need to have somebody that's holding them accountable, so there's not the corruption and the cronyism that
Term
we
limits
talk
don't
about.
matter if the people pay attention.
Well,
Correct.
there are term limits. It's called an election.
Exactly.
No,
I was
exactly, exactly.
I was,
People pay
by the
attention,
way, I
it
was
doesn't
very
matter.
vocally for term limits until I started working in government and seeing. And it's not about me getting. I don't know that I'm even going to run for re-election again, to be honest with you. But after I saw how long it takes for people who get elected to do their job, even on the local level, even in city council, it took me 2 or 3 terms to really even learn everything that we needed to do and the functions of what we did. It takes a while to learn. And if you tell somebody, you can do it once or twice and that's it, I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
And your state reps and your US reps, you get 1 year really to work on actually legislating, and then the next year is
Re-election.
They also shuffle around. We have term limits right now in the Ohio legislature, but all they do is they'll run as many times as they can for state rep, and then they'll go to the Senate, and then they'll hop somewhere else. It doesn't. I mean.
All right, so I lobbed enough candidates into this conversation.
Yeah, well, we're about done. No, I think it was good. I think it's fruitful. It's good conversation. I think any conversation on these where we don't end up screaming and yelling at each other and throwing chairs is good.
We could still do that.
Yeah.
We can talk about particular issues. It's easy to not
So
get
how about healthcare?
That's the thing. It's easy to not
No,
get
yeah.
upset,
Yeah.
when it's like, but though. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, you gotta.
We got to work up to that.
Right. Well, listen. I mean, Buddy Mike is a conservative, and sometimes we talk about it, but we can't really get too detailed, because then it comes to these are what are important to me, and I think these are important to me because then this is what's going to get us
Yeah.
to the promised land. And if you're not agreeing with me, that's an opposition. I mean, for crying out loud, look at abortion. If you look at that, depending on how you fall, if I support abortion, which I do, the other side thinks that I'm supporting
babies.
murder.
Yeah, you hate babies.
Murder.
Why don't you like babies? I have a baby. We don't like my baby?
You called it.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, but that's the thing. I mean,
yeah.
they're so just falling on the definition of when life begins as an example. That means a lot to people. It means a whole lot. So it's kind of easy to see, but Yeah, so really, how do you get past it? I think you largely just deal with it. So there's a cyclical nature to it, but what I was talking about as far as it being as bad as it is, I mean, a threat to our democracy, because again, if we see the other side not, for instance, just flat out supporting the president, then that means that you're un-American, that's the problem. Not, for instance, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or kneeling during the national anthem. He's not turning his back, he's not giving it the finger, he's making a silent statement while still bearing some bit of respect for the flag, and it's absolutely American to do so, and then he's hailed as un-American.
And can't get signed by a team.
Well,
Do
that
his job.
could be completely different because he may not be that great.
So the funny thing is, so you know, Justin and I work together at Outback, and I'd only work on the busy days, you know, because I'd come from being a manager, so I'm not going to work the lowly shifts with the lowly people. I'm going to work the days when I make money, or I'm not going to be here. So the days that I worked was always busy. So Justin was the bartender, and this was like 08, 09, no, 09. So it was right into Obama's first term, and at the time I was, you know, stalwart, conservative, Republican. You know, George W. Bush was like my favorite person. You know, as soon as his memoir came out, I got it and read it cover to cover. I still think he's a great man. And then Justin and I will have that conversation after we stop here.
No, we won't, because I'm going to leave at some point tonight.
But I just remember, like, I'd have to pick up a drink at the bar, and we would start this conversation, and we'd be bickering back and forth, and then I would go and I would take care of my tables, and he would go do something, we'd come back, and like all night long we were arguing about these things, but it was in a way that wasn't, you know, we never hated each, you know, but then we would finish this argument on Friday or whatever it was, and on Monday we would go to Browns training camp and watch the Browns practice and make fun of, what was his name?
It's hard to tell, man.
Murray. No, there's this guy, he was,
Oh my God. No, he was like the lineman or something.
yeah, he was
right?
like a lineman, but he was like the lineman on the bottom rung of the depth chart, and he was out there just like, and we're just like, come on, man, where's the effort? We looked him up on Facebook. We sent a friend request on Facebook. Yeah, he was not our.
That's awesome. Yeah, because then we saw him play like in a preseason game. You're like, oh my God, that's the guy.
I put him on my Madden team and actually got him really good. So,
That's awesome.
but yeah, so for me, it's just, you know, it's being able to have these conversations without getting to that point. And yeah, we have to start somewhere, because if we just came in today and we're like, okay, we're going to have a public forum about abortion, and we're going to have two people from, you know, one representing each side, that's going to get ugly really fast, because right now as a country, we don't know how to have these conversations without getting angry. And so the objective is for us to begin to teach the public, and this is what we're trying to do, is this is how you have a conversation, and this is how we can begin to have these conversations. And if you can better understand my position, and it's almost a humanization. Like,
Correct.
now you guys know each other, we know each other, and we have a respect for each other. We're not going to get hostile, we're not going to get angry, because we're sitting, it's easy if Phil puts something on Facebook, you know, about how great, you know, a president is, or how great this representative is, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, you are the worst person ever, I hate you. You know what I mean? Because it's all blind. You know, he doesn't know who I am, I don't really know who he is, but we disagree on Twitter, and therefore, you know, I can say whatever I want to say. And that's why I want to do it in public, and have these conversations, so we can begin to show people that these conversations can take place, they can be civil, and this is how we begin to move forward. One of the things I've been saying a lot is the objective is to find unity in our diversity, not to make each other all the same. I hate the slogan for America that we're a melting pot. I hate that, because we all just go into this big pot and we get heated up until we melt into this one thing, and we're not one thing. We're a salad, and some of us are the lettuce, and some of us are the peppers, and some of us are, you know, an olive or a tomato, and we each maintain our own identity, our own individualism, but together we make this really delicious salad, you know? And I want us to be able to have that unity, and we're still different, but we can still come together and make something that tastes great. So
I agree.
Thanks for the opportunity. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I
man.
enjoyed it.
Nice to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you too.
And that's the end.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.